You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, welcome back. We're going into our third hour together, and you know what that means. It means that at the back half of this hour, I'm going to take your calls at 773-763-9278. And with a week like this, I know we have a lot to talk about, so start getting ready. But before you do, it's my real privilege to be joined by Clarence Page. He is celebrating his 50th year. Oh my gosh, Clarence, 50th year as a writer and columnist for the Chicago Tribune. His work has earned him the Pulitzer Prize and generations of committed readers. Clarence, welcome.
Thank you, Edwin. It's great to talk to you again.
It's great to talk to you. Hey, first, as a Chicagoan and one, deeply interested in our politics and our society, I want to just start by thanking you for paying attention and thinking about our city and our country the way you have these long years.
Well, same to you, pal. I tell you, your stewardship has really made Chicago a better place.
Hey, I remember back when Harold Washington became Chicago's first black mayor, and our city was deeply divided and tense. You shouldered sort of the incredible burden as a rare at the time black journalist writing for the Tribune's predominantly white readership. And the burden was sort of calmly explaining us to each other at the time and holding everybody to standards of decency and integrity and of sort of providing a calm voice in a dangerous storm.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's not always easy, I tell you, when you got a lot of hot heads on both sides. But that was an amazing period, wasn't it? I mean, I actually started, let me say, when Harold Washington's campaign began, I was working over at Channel 2, WBBF TV, as a weekend reporter. And I was, in 84, I moved over. I was invited to join the Tribune editorial board and become a columnist. I saw exactly what you're talking about. A lot of divides racially, ethnically, politically, and a lot of resentments all came boiling to the surface. But I give Harold Washington a lot of credit for being the kind of a politician who was also a leader who understood the different communities in Chicago and the different interests that people have, and really tried his best to pull people together, even when he was being called all kinds of names. And I think it was really an admirable model of leadership. It meant a lot to me. I know that really helped to attract Barack Obama to the city. But he came to Chicago there near the end of Harold's, right before Harold died. It was he himself said, he looked around and he appreciated the level of leadership and certainly the organizational leadership, et cetera, But Harold Washington's campaign and Barack's campaign wound up having so many similarities. I wrote about an intro to a book Gary Rivlin wrote about Chicago and Harold Washington's campaign, et cetera, because the same kind of dynamics happen. The three-way race, you had people who represented the old guard and the new, who weren't sure of what to think about Harold Washington, and the same thing with Barack Obama. But in both cases, I think we all, in the end of these long sagas, we all learned something.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to get out over my skis a little bit here. But I think
that's okay. That's
Black America has known about white America for a long time. I think white America did not know anything about Black America. And I think Harold taught certainly a lot of Chicago about Black America, but things that just Chicago didn't know. And they were afraid of it. Right. Chicagoans were the Chicagoans who were against Harold were afraid, and they didn't know why. And he in his campaign and his brilliance, his articulate his funny, his deep sort of humanity that came out when he talked, sort of said to people, you know what, it's okay to get to know me. It's okay to get to know Black Chicago. And if you don't, you're missing something. And it was a huge lesson, right? Huge, important lesson for Chicago. And people say today, they say America's more divided than it ever was, or at least since the Civil War. I don't believe it. I think we were more divided when we drank from separate water fountains, or when only men could vote. I think we were, right? We were much more divided then.
And how about the 60s?
The 60s were a very divisive time, right? Same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yep. So, I think about the emotional outpouring after the murder of George Floyd, and to me,
right,
the protests that I saw everywhere that I might have actually been in one or two, they were Black and white together, demanding that we treat us all as Americans. We saw something like the government shouldn't treat people that way, right? And so people were saying, we want to be one country. We don't want to treat people differently, right? Yeah. But this week, the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court that's really not a friend of the Voting Rights Act, told us, you know what, Alabama and a bunch of states, they actually are still creating legislative districts that are dividing people by race. What do you think of that?
Well, I was, first of all, I did my Sunday column on that, in fact, but without going into the whole thing, that's very true. I was surprised, frankly, that the two critical votes in favor of the Black voters there in Alabama came from Chief Justice Roberts and Justice
Kavanaugh.
All of a sudden, I'm having one of these blank.
I have them all the time. Kavanaugh.
This is not old age, I assure you. But two of the most conservative members of the court, in any case, came out this time in favor of the Black voters' position, and I saw that as being a good sign of that there is still some integrity on the court. It's not full of just right-wing ideologues. But at the same time, though, I say beware, folks, because we know that the court's going to take a position on affirmative action in college admissions probably by the end of June. And I suspect this may be a way, directly or indirectly, of softening up the public for the shock that's going to come when that happens. That's just a prediction on my part. But this court, judging by its past positions, it's very well situated to strike down affirmative action in college admissions. And that's going to be interesting to see the reaction here, because a lot of folks say that with college admissions, that doesn't quite hit the grassroots as much as some other programs that are aimed at fighting poverty and child hunger, et cetera, et cetera. We will see. But this is the kind of world that we're in, where all of these issues are bubbling up at once, and we need some people who can be honest brokers to try to bring people together.
Yeah, and on that, I completely agree with you, and I'm equally wary of that decision when it comes down. I am not confident. In fact, I am confident they will get rid of affirmative action. But this notion of getting brokers who can bring us together is so difficult, and it's so difficult for journalists because it makes it seem like there are two sides that are far apart, and it pocks on both their houses, right? But all of the, I mean, everything I've seen. I mean, you know this. You've worked for a traditionally conservative news organization, at least on the editorial board side, but Republicans. Yeah. Republicans that are conservative about things like, well, maybe less government is a better way to the same goal than more government. That's not what the Republican Party is today. It's just not the same thing. So, like, how do you deal with that? It's like, well, the Democrats, you sort of recognize Joe Biden. You sort of like Barack Obama, a little bit like Bill Clinton, a little bit like, I don't know, you can go back to Lyndon Johnson. You look at Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, and you look back and say, is he like George Bush? No. Is he like any Republican that's ever been in the past? No. Right? It's like they just
you're hitting. Yeah, you're hitting on one of the key political questions of our era, and I've been trying to sort it out. And as soon as I do, I promise you, I'm going to write another book, because this way calls for a book. It's very frustrating being a daily journalist because you've only got maybe 700 or 800 words to try to bring wisdom to the world. But some of these issues are more complex than that. And what we have right now the Republican Party, when I was a kid in the 1950s, that was the Democrats and Republicans were different parties than they are now, especially the Republicans. That was the days of Eisenhower. Everybody loved Ike, and
the Republicans were the party of civil rights, and the Democrats weren't.
I'm sorry, what was that? Excuse me?
The Republicans were the party of civil rights, and the Democrats were not in the 1950s.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right, because Eisenhower actually signed a civil rights bill that everybody's forgotten about because well, to make a long story short, it didn't have any teeth to it. The Southern racist Democrats blocked that, and you didn't really have one with teeth until Southern LBJ passed the Civil Rights Act of *64 when I was in high school. And at the same time, you had Barry Goldwater on the Republican side that year, who was a right-wing ideologue, but at least he was a sensible right-wing ideologue compared to the loony folks we've got now that Donald Trump has stirred up, who are talking about a revolution of their own kind. I mean, Donald Trump his rally today was stirring people up, as well as a number of his followers, and Carrie Lake was there from Nevada, who was talking about, it's not a direct quote, but essentially, go and get your guns and be ready. That's the message that's being sent out with grassroots Republicans. And yet, I've been apologizing for my Republican friends, but it's hard to do it now because the polls still show anywhere from 70 to 85% of Republicans who support Donald Trump. And he's a clear front runner for the nomination, whether he stays out of jail or not. That's another issue. But it's a very different party, but that's a reflection, too, of how much America has changed. And I think ordinary Americans across racial lines are looking for some real leadership and not just the grandstanding that we see in this era of internet and this is my old man voice now. Talking about this era in which people are made into political leaders overnight with a YouTube video or a Twitter tweet.
Yes, but let me ask you what counts as leadership in that sense, because I think back, I just want to think about the term that Joe Biden has had so far, and I mean what Nancy Pelosi did with a razor thin majority in the House. The 117th Congress passed, bills that you and I haven't seen since the 1960s. Monumental legislation that is nearly impossible to pass. Much of it was bipartisan, right? And it got passed.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So like, I mean, if you want to talk about sort of like what defines the leadership that we need, I think they're doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, well, I think that we still do have people who've got some sense on Capitol Hill. But the problem is, I mean, if you saw the fracas over McCarthy's race to be Speaker of the House, it was like a zoo down there. And I mean, hey, speaking of Harold Washington days, I mean, did you think about council wars and those days? watching this fight between Republicans there on the House floor, and it's still going on. The disgruntled Republicans in the House who don't like the way what vote for the budget ceiling went. For the past week now, they just refuse to do anything. And legislation has been drawn to a halt there in the House, a lot like the old Harold Washington days when Ava Doliak tried to take Harold Washington's seat one day there in the city council.
Let me just push back a little on here. I want to push back a little because as bad as what for those of you who don't remember, the city council was divided 29 to 21, and the 29 were radically opposed to Harold Washington, and they controlled all of the legislation. But in Congress, the people who are stopping it are not a majority of Congress. This would be an easy fix if the so-called Hastert rule disappeared and the Republicans said, you know what, we'll take legislation to the floor that a majority supports, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. And then this problem would disappear in 1 second, right? But they won't do it. They will only take legislation to the floor if it's supported by the Republican caucus, which means, you know, and since they have no votes to spare, it means if 3 people or 4 people say, you know what, we're not for it, they won't do anything. So that is like the whole country being held hostage by some whiny babies, right? And
that's absolutely true. That's right.
Yeah.
When you saw this happen, I mean, they did get the debt ceiling vote through, but then afterwards, now you've got the whiny babies who are preventing anything else from happening just to show their disgust. With you name it. I mean, it's the grievance of the day club down there. But that's not legislating. But you got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and some others who they don't care about legislating. They care about fundraising, and that's what they're doing off of this.
I know, it's crazy, right? Because if they would just say, you know what, the majority of the House will make the rules, and not the majority of the caucus, then they would have, a pretty interesting bipartisan caucus that would legislature would get a lot of stuff done.
That's right.
And not fringy
like the good old
either.
Days once again.
Yeah, but we could do that.
Yeah.
Not, off to the fringes. We could actually get some really important stuff done. But they won't do it.
That's right.
It won't do it.
Well, I'm afraid. I'm afraid show business is taking over. That's going to be in my book.
Yeah. Well, that show business guy got elected president, but he's on his way to jail. Do you think that any of these
from jail? I was trying to remember today, by the way. Do you remember we had an alderman back in the 80s who got reelected while he was in jail?
Yes.
Remember that?
I was thinking.
Yes.
Yes.
How soon will forget?
But right now, like the people in Chicago, they turned out a lot. The city council's reputation is not terrible right now in Chicago. I mean, if you polled Chicagoans about the city council would poll higher than the U.S. Supreme Court is polling in trust across the country. Yeah. I mean, what does that tell you?
Council now. Well, we've got a new city council now, which is heavily, I forget the numbers now, but it's a heavily first term Democrats who are not just liberal but progressive. You've got a new generation moving in, and I can't wait to see what happens with this, how it's going to work. But it's a very different council than we used to have, and we got a brand new mayor too, and that's going to make some kind of a difference. But here again, as you often see with progressives and other ideologues, they, actually having ideas and proposals is one thing. Getting them passed and initiated is something else. So I can't wait to see what happens on both of these forces.
I totally agree. And I worry as a Democrat on this, on this side of the world, I worry that without a right of center party, we will go terribly astray. What helps is to have this debate where you test your ideas against a sane other person who thinks a little differently than you think, and you can have that argument. But there is no right of center conversation to have anymore because that party has vanished and become, a cult.
Yeah, and there are sensible people left in the Republican Party, we must point out, but they feel hamstrung because if they're not 100% MAGA, they're worried about a backlash at the polls. And that, again, is a structural problem that we have got with Congress now that nobody expected until we got this kind of an ideological gridlock.
Yeah, I had a guest on earlier who explained it really interestingly. He said, look, because of gerrymandering, and Democrats do it too, but the big gerrymandering right now that's made such a difference happened after Barack's second term when Democrats were blown out and the maps were written by Republicans. So the big gerrymandering means that the elections that matter are primaries because your party's never going to lose the general election the way these districts are drawn, which means that in order to, since you're only worried about a primary challenge, you have to become more radical. You're pushed to take a more extreme side because you don't want to be called a rhino and beaten that way. So the one of the impacts of gerrymandering is that you cannot come to the center. You cannot talk to someone across party lines anymore.
Oh, no, that's right. That's right. And it's a polarization for the sake of polarization. When Harold Washington, when Donald Trump first announced he was running, he declared his candidacy, and he started insulting Mexican immigrants. Remember that? And
before he even got down the stairs.
Yeah, and I said, hey, no, he's really going to the extreme now. He's never going to get anywhere because American voters are in the mainstream moderates. Well, I still say they are, but Donald Trump figured out what you can do. You can gin up enough resentments out there that you can bring people out to the polls who haven't voted in years, if ever. And you got this whole different segment. And that's what has happened. And Trump turns to them when he wants to. Well, before we'd say when he wanted to get legislation passed. Now we're going to say when he wants to break the law. You saw it on January 6th when he ginned up his MAGA his MAGA armies out there, and they stormed the Capitol. And now he's generating the same kind of talk about his own indictment. So it's we're in deep, and we can't just stick our heads in the sand about this.
Well, Clarence, in the print business, you have to worry about deadlines, but live radio is live, and sometimes things happen. I'm sorry that we got disconnected for a moment.
That's what makes it exciting, you know?
Yep. But you were in the middle of talking.
Yeah, and I really worked up a good head of steam there too. But my main point was though that I think Donald Trump really exploited division in a way nobody really forecast because normally, like you say, people try to campaign toward their base in the primary, and then you reach across the aisle and try to get the independent swing voters in the general election. Donald Trump threw that out the window and just campaigned straight to the dark side. I mean, his first announcement, he went into this rant in which he slammed immigrants coming up from Mexico and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, man, he's not going to get anywhere with that. It turned out he got a lot of people, exit polling later showed, a lot of people who hadn't voted in years, or if ever, who got excited and came out and became MAGA warriors. And Trump still reaches toward that base. And they were the ones who really were responsible for storming the Capitol, et cetera. So our politics are in a state now where stability is not just an academic word. It's something we need.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, he didn't just campaign that way. He governed that way. He just said from day one, he does not want to be the whole president's country. He wants to be the president of some country within a country and have them take over.
MAGA.
That is antithetical to who we are. And I think America has woken up. I think the Supreme Court's terrible polling is partly responsible for the good ruling we just had. I think the folks who are not taking the off-ramp on offer by Donald Trump's indictment under the Espionage Act are going to feel a lot of pressure from ordinary Americans. I think we've had it with this game, and we want, exactly as you said, just leadership that just, says, we got a job to do. You elected us to do some work, so let us do the work.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. It's been something that I've been saying for the last how many years, since 2016, certainly. But at the same time, though, I mean, Americans are already standing up to MAGA folks in their own families. And what's happened, it has divided families. People talk about Thanksgiving now as being a time, don't talk about politics, because this really hits people in the heart with this kind of populist politics, and it's not new. America has a long tradition of populist politics that sometimes appeal to the dark side. That was how the Ku Klux Klan rose up. That was part of the prairie populism that we saw in past times. I mean, this is not new, and we're not the only country where this happens. And so it's something that people need to deal with that now. Like I said, this is not the Republican or Democratic Party that we had back in the 50s.
No, not at all. Well, listen, I really appreciate your time. It's so fun to catch up. We should do it more often.
Well, I look forward to it, and please have me back on sometime. We can talk about
indeed, I will.
If we go off a cliff or not as this campaign season heats up.
Yep. All right, I will make sure we do that. Thank you so much. And congratulations on, 50 years. Wow. Awesome.
I can't believe it either, man.
Take care.
I thought I'd be at the Tribune for 2 or 3 years, and then that would be it. That's what usually happens.
Yeah, well, it stuck, and it's made a difference, so thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, everybody. That was columnist, editorial board writer, syndicated columnist, Pulitzer Prize winner Clarence Page.